Hey class, wanted to do a video instead of a PowerPoint because PowerPoints kind of bore me often. So we're going to have a conversation today about New Coke marketing research, and we're going to use Malcolm Gladwell's Blink to kind of guide our conversation and discuss some of the points that he brings up. I'll introduce to you now Richard Kaiser. He is the co-founder of a local marketing agency, Lion and Panda. Gladwell.
Oh, that is Gladwell.
Yes.
I've been a fan of Malcolm Gladwell for a very long time. I find that his perspective on things to be very different than traditional American perspectives. He's kind of a import to America. He's originally from Canada. He looks at things a lot differently, and so looking at Blink, this is his second book. This came out after Tipping Point and right before he did Outliers, and then his fourth book, which was David and Goliath. What I think he does that's really brilliant is that he will kind of find a subject matter. So whether that's Tipping Point, where he'll give you a lot of different perspectives on it, and then he'll kind of show you some stories that kind of contradict it and leave you kind of at the end of the book to make your own judgments. And I think that's kind of why I like it. Blink is definitely one of my favorite topics, just because from a marketing perspective, there's so many ways of looking at how we interpret the way that research comes back, or how people look at products, how people view websites, how people make decisions is really kind of the core of the book.
Okay. In actually the start of the book, he goes off leading with the Getty Museum purchasing a 2,000-year-old statue. And it's a very peculiar study because the museum, which was very young and very willing to fund the scientific research to find out the authenticity of this item, which was in perfect condition, which no one ever heard of for how old it was. And it was very peculiar that it passed all the scientific tests, but then he started doing rounds to different specialists of the time period, and they were all instinctively denying that it was what the salesperson said it was. So
you have this. It's a Kuros, and so it's a young boy, and the backstory of this is that it was in such mint condition because of the fact that it was buried underground. It had been excavated, and this is something from 6th century BC. And so what's fascinating about it is because they were suggesting the fact that this was the most complete Kuros ever discovered, right? And so this is a $10 million purchase.
Yes.
And so you have these people who they're going to go through and they're going to do all of these tests on it, and then they run carbon dating testing on it, and it's passing everything. And so finally they purchase it. And then you have these people who come around and just upon looking at it, recognize the fact that this is a fake. Mm-hmm. And that it's really a jump-off point for the rest of the book, and it's looking at how 8 months of research and studying this thing didn't deduce or come up with the same results that, a blink of an eye, they made a determination on this, and there were multiple people who were well-versed in Greek statues who instantly came up with the same result. This is not it. This is a forgery.
I remember one of them saying, I feel like there's a wall between me and it when I'm looking at it. Or there was another who was perplexed. I was like, this looks young. Or this looks like it's never been in the ground. It's like anyone who's ever done any kind of excavation knows this is too darn clean.
Right.
And it was very peculiar because, the guy, Malcolm, made sure that he described all the different scientific data. Like we're talking making sure that the rock is from the same location that it's supposed to be coming from, and that the overtime corrosion of the acid outside of the stone was occurring at the exact same rate that was required to pass all the scientific tests.
Yes.
And boom, there you have it. A 2-second judgment call by an expert. This is actually a key quantifier. Managed to calculate and demonstrate that no, this is in fact incorrect. And then soon, after further research, all the scientific data started falling through, and they started following the paper trail. And then suddenly it was supposed to lead back to a Swiss collector that all of his records didn't match up, and we have like inconsistencies that were over a dozen years of paperwork, and so they eventually turns out the things are fake.
Right. and it's kind of funny because if you look at the Getty's museum, they have like the miniature replica of it, and in there it states that this is either from 9th century BC or 1975.
So it's a very good place to jump off in that it shows that the analysis capable within the brain, a trained mind. So then there comes again that quantifier, able to be as good, if not better, than months and years of research spent on a product or on an idea or on a campaign. So we dive from there. I actually mentioned him earlier. We were talking about Kina, which was this artist from back in the 90s. I'll play a video for you guys later, don't worry. I happen to like it. It's good music. And it was very peculiar because all these people in the music industry discovered him, from Rolling Stones to Atlantic Records. They were all going just ape crazy for this guy's material. And it passed the MTV test, and people kept requesting the song. And every time, the guy performed in front of a famous musician, everybody wanted to know who this guy was, and I want to know his records and all this jazz. But the guy never went big. And the reason for that was the market research didn't back him up.
Right.
So it was this very peculiar thing where they were doing this massive research with over 200,000 people chiming in to, should this song be in the top 40? Because that was the only way to get a song to play on the radio. It had to be in a top 40 list. That's what guaranteed you all those record sales. Because it didn't fall into the character into any like major category of R&B or any major category of rap music. It was this weird hybrid, and also had like rock notes.
Well, and I think what's interesting about this, right, is that if you go back to the early '90s and the way that they would try and interpret what was going to be popular with people, is you would basically have people who would call up on the phone and they'd be part of the Nielsen rating system, and they would play kind of a short excerpt of the song, and then they would ask you to grade it on a scale from 1 to 5, right? 1 is this is terrible, I wouldn't listen to this. 5 being this is amazing, and nobody really got it, because when you listen to just kind of a snippet of the song, it doesn't really
30-second bite.
Yeah. He doesn't come across well in 30 seconds. What you're looking for in 30 seconds is things with a lot of hooks. You're looking for,
catchy tune, little jingle, little chorus.
But if all of these people in the music business were listening to the album, and so instead of getting that kind of thin slice that Gladwell talks about a lot in the book, they were listening to the whole thing, versus the way that they were doing their market research was flawed.
Right.
Arguably.
So actually bring up thin slicing. So now le crème de la crop. Let's talk about New Coke. So New Coke is the concentration of this study. It just to give you the ballpark. 1985, we have development of New Coke as a response to a marketing ad campaign by Pepsi.
Yes.
They had the Pepsi Challenge, and what they did was, which I will by this point have already tested you people with the Pepsi Challenge. Just to reiterate, we have 2 blind cups and one has Coke, one has Pepsi, a sip, 4 ounces at most, and you give it to a random person in the street to try it out.
Right.
What happened was, over 59% of the time, people chose Pepsi. And it came down to it being sweeter. And this is a classic example of thin slicing.
Yes. So you've got Pepsi who's coming out with these, small samples of their product against Coke, which is a lot less sweet. And so when people are doing this, naturally your instinct is to favor the sweeter, right? And so what's really interesting about it is Coke kind of called, this is wrong, and they would run the same tests and got the same results.
Right.
And an entire organization freaking out that a majority of people prefer Pepsi over Coke.
Yes.
And so now they've gone into panic mode and they're like, well, it's obvious that Coke needs to be sweeter. And so they roll out new Coke.
Right. And after a lot of sweetening, and actually it came out way sweeter than even Pepsi.
Yeah.
They wanted to outsweet the sweeteners.
What's amazing about this story is that they launched this in April of 1985, and by July there is such an outpour of just resentment towards New Coke, and they don't get it. And by July, you have the president of Coke going and making announcements that this was a total failure. This was a flop.
My bad.
Everyone's upset, and we're going to bring traditional Coke back
As
and
Coca-Cola Classic.
which is any marketing that you see from 1985 onward, Coca-Cola Classic. It's been around for years. Even the frickin' panda bears, or polar bears,
Right, the polar bears and Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Coca-Cola.
Classic, right? So even though this was a huge flop, they still continued with New Coke, and they rebranded it as Coke 2, and then they
For the youngins, because the youngins love sugar.
yeah, and then they brought Coca-Cola Classic back.
Yeah.
And so really, what this what Gladwell talks about in Blink is this idea that the market research was wrong. Nobody drinks 4 ounces of Coke and then puts it back in the fridge. It's not how you do it, right?
Right.
You drink the
whole
12
darn
ounce
can,
can,
yeah.
you drink
Bottle,
the
what
16
have you.
ounce throwaway, and that's how people experience it. And so you have a very wide audience of people who like Coke for the sweetness level that it was at when you drink the whole can versus when you drink only a portion of it. Very similar to the music example of, if you only get that thin slice
Right.
of the data, it changes entire perspectives. Gladwell will show you that.
Right.
And they'll show you how, sometimes a snap decision can be right, and sometimes a snap decision, it can be incredibly wrong.
Exactly. And actually, I wanted to talk about as well another factor that Gladwell dove into as part of the experience of drinking a Coke was brand power over a person. Nobody drinks a soda anonymously in a vacuum. You have to take into context that I have a can of Coca-Cola and this makes me feel good.
Yes.
There's the campaign, they called it Red, White, and You. It was like Coca-Cola doesn't get more American than that. Uncle
like
Sam
apple pie with a piece of American cheese on top.
A little American flag.
A flag, yes.
And a Coke on the side.
That's it. It's America and on a plate.
Bam. Sell that to Europe. And they did. So it's a very interesting thing. There were other case studies that Gladwell actually proposed where brand power was brought in. A couple agencies in California were able to raise prices on a Campbell's soup can by making the face like 80% bigger on the can. You being able to see the person's face justified you spending 10 cents more per can every time. So there's a lot of things that you have to take into account when doing market research. The New Coke failure, I think, exemplifies, yes, market research can and often is, throughout the book, a very dangerous thing. You get too comfortable relying on numbers and not being able to call judgment on an educated guess.
Well, one of my favorite quotes is that numbers don't lie, people lie.
Right.
So if X percent of the population is against the president, if he has a 51% approval rating, you get Fox News and they go like, let's do the quick math, 49%. X million people think the president's an idiot, right? Exactly. And then you have CNN who's spinning the story the same way,
the other way,
and they're like, the majority of the people
support the president.
The president is a brilliant man. He's like Gandhi and Einstein if they had a baby. So numbers don't lie, people lie, and if you look at the New Coke. They just had really smart people who understood like how to manipulate market research to validate what they wanted.
Right. Gladwell said it best. The company, in fear, allowed the guys with the white coats to take over.
Absolutely.
So, New Coke serves as an example of how you can misuse market research. I wanted to talk to you about ways that we can use market research in a positive light, as like a learn from, please don't do that again kind of scenario.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to keep doing it again.
Right.
Because, unfortunately, the cheapest way to do market research is the worst way. When you look at market research, it's easy to ask people what you want, what you think, well, I like that better, well, why? And so what you have is you genuinely create liars. Because people are going to come up with a reason of why they liked it better. Before we started this, Juan and I were talking a little bit, and I used to play this trick on my friends.
The triple blind test.
And so what you do is you set 3 cans of beer in front of people, Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, and then you put 3 cups out. The hardcore Bud Light guy is I like Bud Light, Coors Light, it's garbage, Miller Lite, and so I would put these cups in front of them, and then they would identify what they liked about each one, and the first one they would be like, oh, that's crap, that's definitely Coors. The second one I really liked, that was definitely Bud Light, and the third one, that was gross too. That was the Miller Lite.
Clearly.
And then I tell them that all 3 were Bud Light or Coors Light or whatever, because I use the same one in each class, and it's really just reiterating the point that people will make up reasons of why they think they like things.
Based on brand loyalty, what is one of the huge factors.
Yes. I'm a Bud Light guy versus I'm this, and really, I still.
So it's what he's hitting here is so people in the food industry will differentiate things that are similar with a rating system called degrees of difference, DOD. So, for example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi are 4 degrees of difference apart, which in the food business, that's really next to nothing, actually. And so what happens is when you line up the triple test here, and I will have also tricked you with this, haha. 3 cups, 2 cups, have Coke, the other one has Pepsi, point out the one that does not belong. And people will, I think, 26% will succeed in pointing it out. So you actually have a better chance at guessing than you do trying to taste your way without having any kind of expertise and palate training and that kind of professional discernment. So asking the public, who does not spend that much time thinking about your product, which is very hard for marketing research guys to admit, asking them hard questions like, which do you prefer of these? I'm like, well, this week it's the one that's cheaper.
Right. And it's interesting. we can't talk about business without bringing up, Steve Jobs, blah. And one of the things that Jobs said is, you don't ask the people what they want. You try and predict it. And so that was kind of his way of going around market research. You have similar philosophies with people like Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, if I asked what people wanted, they would say a faster horse. Right. So you have those flaws in the way that a lot of people do market research. You have people who will do market research via surveys. There are programs. How did you like our website? And the type of person who will stop and fill out a 2-minute survey today is not even close to average.
Right.
Very
few and far between.
Yeah.
In fact, most of us didn't have a point to avoid having to fill out anything. It's an inconvenience in our day. Why are you bothering me? There have to be an incentive systems, and therein suddenly your information gets muddy.
Well,
because of the
you get into the idea of incentives, and then that starts to skew the data too. Because if I say beforehand, like, we want you to talk about our product, and one person out of this group is going, the incentive is we're going to give you a year's supply of Pop-Tarts. That's going to start to skew what your responses are, right?
I clearly already like Pop-Tarts.
So you have these inherent issues with market research, and that's where the cheaper forms of market research aren't very effective. The things that people are doing that are far more effective, things like my business partner, his fiance is in neuropsychology. That is different because you're not asking people what they think. You're watching how they react to things. So when she's working with like Nielsen and Company, you're strapped in and basically now you're watching this TV commercial and it's tracking eye patterns and things and like reactors in your brain. This is completely different because it's tracking whether or not your eye, you're looking over here and then all of a sudden half a second later the frame changes and now the logo's down here and whether their eyes went that way, now okay, well there's a quick flip that we need to make there. So that's easy to do in kind of in a commercial
setting, sure.
Where you can start to get to market research from like a web design perspective is looking at analytics and you can track via heat map where people's mouse go, where the mouse is scrolling across the page. You can start looking at what things get clicked, what things don't. One of my friends worked on the scooter store, and what was really interesting about this is they're looking at it and they're constantly doing A/B testing. So they're half the audience gets this and half the audience gets this, and they're testing different things. And so in one situation they put Wilford Brimley up there, and Wilford Brimley had like negative 0.03% conversion rate, and so they were like, get rid of Wilford. And then on the other hand, they looked at it and they changed the call to action, right? Like they changed what the button said. Instead of saying submit, it said see if you're qualified. Boom. 37% increase in the number of people who filled out the form and submitted it. Right? So that's the type of market research that to me works. It's not if you went out and you ask people like, hey, we're thinking about changing this button. Like, we think it's gonna do something.
What button preference do you have that you would click on my website?
Another case study on this, there was a advertising agency that looked at the 1984 commercial, right? Like Macintosh, they're releasing the first interface ever that's using a mouse to click around on things instead of nobody here is going to know what the hell I'm talking about because you're all like way too young. But before that, it was you were typing in command prompts and things like that. It was like this nasty like black screen, green text. You were typing in all of this stuff, and Microsoft came out with this point and click, which you use today every day on everything. What's funny is like 20 years later, they showed this same video from the Super Bowl of 1983 to kind of like, the round table, we're going to do market research on this. And like adamantly, everybody was, no, absolutely do not show this commercial. This is crap. It doesn't show the product. I don't understand it. I don't get why this is anything.
So that's actually a great point. One of the things that is a flaw in market research that Gladwell actually points out is there's a difference between not liking something and, for example, being confused by something new. So when someone is, he used the Aeron chair, which is now, like, we have them all over the computer labs. Literally, like, it is the most popular office chair today. But at the time when they did all the market research, they were looking at it and they're like, this is the ugliest chair. There's no cushions. It doesn't demonstrate that I have authority. There's no a giant back. But
it's not the big leather, gold beaded.
But it actually supports your back. It actually, allows you to sit in in an actual stance that doesn't damage your lower back, which is what the man designed it for. And he stuck to his guns, even though all the market research said, this is insane. Please, for the love of God, attach some sort of foamy cushion on there with leather. Please. Mesh? Crazy. Like, and boom, the guy nailed it. His gut decision was right. He knew that when you sat on this, mind you, it wasn't a big sensation right off the bat. It grew over time. But the thing, I think, doubled in sales every quarter. It's just boop, 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 boop.
And what's funny about that is, like, even today, if you go out networking and you go to like the chamber events, when the furniture stores are like representing at these events, they have the chairs and they don't, they won't let you just look.
Right.
They're like, no, sit in it, and then you realize that my ass has never felt this comfortable ever before, and it's amazing.
And there's lumbar support.
and then they're like, oh, this is a $4,000 chair, and you're like, sweet, I'm gonna suggest Tina in purchasing consider this when
my whole company will have this chair.
Yeah.
Comfort.